According to leaks, Nintendo's big blockbuster release for 2026 is going to be a remake of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time for the Switch 2. It's kind of funny because 15 years ago in 2011, on the 3DS we got a remake of Star Fox 64 and The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time within the same year, actually just a couple of months apart. And now that we have Star Fox confirmed for the Switch 2 in June, it looks like we'll be repeating that strategy for some reason. Now, Star Fox isn't something I can really say a lot about, but I do think it's kind of ridiculous that 70% of this series is now based on the same original game. There's no evolution in this series. It's very strange. Though I will say that Star Fox on the Switch 2 is the biggest leap that this franchise has seen, at least in terms of visuals. The game actually looks really good. I actually like how the characters look and everything. It's a very big leap forward, and the series deserves that, and the fact that it has fully cinematic cutscenes and all that, very cool. But what about Ocarina of Time? This game came out in 1998 and it's already been remade, like I said, in 2011. So does it need another remake? Is there anything about this game that a remake could improve or fix? Well, no. Okay, bye. I'm kidding. Don't go away yet. It's true that I don't think that this game really needs to be improved or enhanced in any way. The 3DS remake already pretty much made it the definitive version of what it could be. That was the version I grew up with and I loved it. That's the game that made me fall in love with video games. And I actually think that any changes that you make to the original are not going to go down well with fans of their original game. So it doesn't need to happen. But I also don't think a remake actually needs to try to replace the original. In some cases, sure, that's the case. But Ocarina of Time, the original version, is already on the Switch. You can play it through Nintendo Switch Online. So I don't think putting this game out makes sense from the perspective of, we're making the definitive version of this game. I don't think that is or should be the point. What this remake can do is provide a fresh new take on Ocarina of Time. The game is old enough that at this point, making it again doesn't necessarily feel like a desperate cash grab. I think it can just be the result of people who grew up with this game, either the actual original on the Nintendo 64 or even a 3DS remake, and just thinking of what can we do with this? How can we take this original concept and story and world and just make it a little different, make it something that's unique and that can stand next to the original without replacing it entirely. I think that's really the goal here, is just to make something new for a new audience with new sensibilities and expectations that stands on the same level of that original game without trying to replace it. And I think that is still a worthy goal. I think that's worth aiming for with a remake like this. So the question then is, how do you do that? Well, I think obviously there are elements of Ocarina of Time that need to stay the same for it to be the same game, even in general. The general story should be the same, and the general landmarks should too, the same number of towns and just general locations. That shouldn't really change. The core concept of Ocarina of Time needs to be there if it's going to be a remake. But there is a lot that can be done there, and I think the first step there is obviously the presentation, because now that we've seen Star Fox on the Switch 2, and like I said, it looks like a huge upgrade, I think it makes it very obvious what we should be aiming for on the Switch 2. And it's especially important because the 3DS remake, yeah, it did come out 13 years after the original, but because you're making a game for a handheld, that leap in performance really isn't that significant. The 3DS version does look a lot better than the original on the 64. It's kind of playing the 3DS version is kind of how you remember the Nintendo 64 version looking like as a kid. So it is better for sure, but it's still very close to the original. And so having all this power of the Switch 2 that again has already been shown off very well with Star Fox, there is so much that you can do here to make it just so much more grandiose and detailed and vibrant. And that's the thing, I do want this to be something that looks still very much like Ocarina of Time with its general vibe. Ocarina of Time is a very vibrant, colorful game. The greenery in that game is very green. And so I don't want this to be something that takes after the style of the Zelda games on the Switch, like Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, which have somewhat more subdued colors in the overworld. And I really want them to stick to that vibrant style in like Hyrule Field and all the greenery and stuff. Make keep those vibrant colors, but just make it a lot more detailed. Also, again, more detailed than the kind of stuff where you would get with the Switch games for Zelda. Like this, I think this is the kind of game where going for a more sort of hyper realistic look would be cool. Just because I feel like that's what this game was trying to do back in the day. So I think having all this power, it would be cool to use it to try and achieve that goal, with the power we have now. So I think that's one big thing that could improve. And obviously there's the music as well. I think the music in this game is absolutely wonderful. I loved it in the first game. There are so many songs here that I just absolutely adored. Saria's song, Sun's song, the Song of Storms, Requiem of Spirit. There's so many great songs in this game, but a lot of them are really short, and obviously they're just Nintendo 64 quality, so they're not very good in terms of like the instrumentals and everything. So there's so much room here to just expand these songs. In terms of the length, I would love to hear more of these songs, but also obviously just make it orchestrated, have all these instruments, making it bigger. I think that would be amazing. Also, much like Star Fox, I think it'd be nice to have like fully voice acted cutscenes. We've already seen that in the Switch games for Zelda. A lot of scenes in those games are voice acted, and I feel like you don't have that many huge interactions that I think this would necessarily be like a massive undertaking to just voice them over. But yeah, just make it more cinematic with fully voiced, just more dynamic stuff. Just make it more immersive to be in that world, because it was a wonderful world to explore when I was younger, and I think being able to recreate that feeling for a new generation with the kind of power you have now, that'll be amazing. But what about the gameplay or the world itself? What should really change here? I already said that the general landmarks should stay the same, so what can actually change? Well, one thing that I think this game should definitely learn from Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom is just being seamless. I don't think anything needs to change place. I just think going from one location to the next should always be seamless, no loading screens, everything should just work. That's absolutely doable. We know it was done on the Switch, it can definitely be done on the Switch too, so that is the first thing that I think should be done, and I don't really remember any specific places where this might be a downside, so yes, absolutely. But then, while the general locations of places should remain about the same in my opinion, I do think the dungeons themselves are prime for just being completely redone. I think everything here can really change. The new puzzles, the way that these games should be reproduced now on today's hardware, the movement is going to be a lot more freeform. You have camera controls and everything. So I think there's so much more room here for puzzles to be done differently inside dungeons. Just make things feel more dynamic, more complex. You can redo so much of these dungeons, and it's not like Nintendo really sees these dungeons as untouchable, because they released the Master Quest version of Ocarina of Time on the GameCube, and then on the 3DS, the Master Quest was unlocked, in the post-game after beating the game the first time. And the Master Quest version has a bunch of differences already in a lot of the dungeons, so I think considering the leap in power we have here and everything that can be done, I think the dungeons themselves could be totally redone in how you progress through them, the things you have to do. There's a lot of potential there, so just make keep the key items that you get in the dungeons. I think the key items that are there, they're part of the identity of the game, and they're kind of essential. And I don't think you want to expand too far. But just give those items new uses. I feel like there's new things you can do, come up with new ideas around the same items, because with all the freedom that you have now, I feel like there's a lot that you could do to make the game more unique in that sense. So yeah, definitely something that I'd like to see here. Just make the dungeons more unique, and the boss fights as well, honestly. A lot of the boss fights in Ocarina of Time, they were great at the time, they're still completely valid. But also the concepts were a little bit basic sometimes, like in the Forest Temple, you fight against Phantom Ganon, and so much of that is just you're spinning around to see what painting Ganon's coming out of, so you can shoot it with an arrow. And that's fine, that's a totally fine concept. But now that you're gonna have free camera controls, that becomes a little easier to do, and it's a widescreen setup and everything, so just having that basic setup is a little too basic for a modern game. So redo the boss fights, keep the bosses, keep the general concept of them maybe, but just add new moves, new ways that they can be tricky, things like that. I think there's, again, a lot of potential there to make these things a little more engrossing by today's standards. Aside from that, I think the only thing in this game that really needs to be touched a little bit would be Hyrule Field. So Hyrule Field was pretty massive on the Nintendo 64. Like it was a big thing to have such a big open space in this game, but it was kind of empty. You didn't really do a lot in this aside from just getting to the landmarks, which were all on the edges of Hyrule Field. So that it's not like you were doing a whole lot to even get like you had to travel a lot just to get to the next destination. The only thing that was really in the middle there was Lon Lon Ranch. So there's things you can do here, and I think a very basic one that you can start with is, there's like horse riding challenges at Lon Lon Ranch. So I think one thing you could do just to start is make some of those horse riding challenges take place on all of Hyrule Field. Like have, either just speed-based things with like, having to dodge certain things, or just, obstacle courses, things like that. Or even like the target practice, or you have to shoot while you're riding your horse, like things like that. Just make use of that space somewhat with the horse, like get you an encouragement for being good at riding the horse and all the mechanics around that. I think that would be cool. And then you can just like sprinkle little things here and there, like little patches with trees, or there might be some sort of collectible hidden, like the sculptures that you would find throughout the world in the original game. Maybe you can hide some extras in like a little forest, or maybe there's like caves you can fall down into and there's something you can find there. Maybe even like something like shrines in Breath of the Wild, where you just have like small challenges. You don't make it so core to the objective of the game, but little things that you might be able to get for completing those challenges. Just little things that are scattered throughout the Hyrule Field, just to make it a little more worth exploring. Even if it's not like, obviously I'm not expecting this to be like a Breath of the Wild type open world. I just think adding a little bit more would be nice. Where I think they could go really crazy though is the post game. After beating the game, if you have a Master Quest mode or a hero mode or something like that, I think at this point they can just distance themselves from the original even more and just go kind of crazy with it. Obviously you can redo the dungeons again and puzzles and whatever, but I think it'd be cool actually if this Master Quest mode actually brought enemies that weren't even originally in Ocarina of Time. Like, what if you found Lionels or something? What if I think of the Breath of the Wild DLC, how they just randomly sprinkled in these floating platforms with enemies and treasure chests where you can just get weapons and stuff. Like something like that in Hyrule Field, for example, where you could just defeat a bunch of enemies and get some kind of collectible from it. Or actually, if you're thinking of the Breath of the Wild DLC, look at the Trial of the Sword, where you have these challenge rooms with a bunch of enemies. I think it'd be cool, again, just have special doors or something that lead to these challenge rooms throughout the game where you can get special collectibles and you fight enemies that weren't originally in Ocarina of Time. If you can take a Lionel and adapt it to the mechanics of Ocarina of Time and you fight it there, stuff like that. I think that would be really cool. And again, it doesn't really need to make a lot of sense. If it's post-game content, just go kind of crazy with it, just to have something that feels really new, that, just something more unique and almost kind of silly. I think that would be nice to see. And on the topic of adding new enemies, actually, if you're adding them, just go ahead and add them to dungeons too. Have new things in dungeons in this post-game. You can even add smaller enemies alongside the boss fights just to mess things up, or just add new rooms in dungeons that have more enemies or things like that. Just be creative, just add things that don't really belong in Ocarina of Time, but I feel like, for a remake and for the post-game content, that could be kind of interesting to see. Otherwise, I don't think there's really a whole lot more I can think of that you can add to this game without just making it a different game entirely. I think the things I've described kind of strike that perfect balance of, adding enough new, but also honoring the original without actually trying to replace it. I feel like that's a tough balance to get, but this kind of does that, so that's kind of what I'm going for here. With that being said, what do you want to see in an Ocarina of Time remake? Let me know down in the comments. I promise I'm gonna read them. Just make your voices heard. If you'd like to hear more of my thoughts on games that haven't come out yet, why not check out my video on Pokemon Winds and Waves? I'm pretty excited about it, so go ahead. As always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.